Horror is a broad literary genre devoted to exploring fear, dread, and unease by confronting readers with threats that overwhelm ordinary human control, whether supernatural, psychological, social, or existential. Its central aim is not merely to frighten, but to disturb, to force an encounter with what is repressed, forbidden, or destabilizing in both the world and the self. Hello, welcome to my channel. Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and today I'm going to attempt to do a nearly impossible task, to give you 20 essential horror books. And it's nearly impossible because horror is a very broad genre, covers a lot of different topics, and to distill it down to just 20 essential books is really rather impossible. Historically, horror grew out of folklore, myth, and religious fear, where monsters, demons, curses, and divine punishment embodied cultural anxieties about death, sin, and the unknown. Early Gothic novels of the 18th and 19th century transformed these fears into literature, using haunted spaces, transgressive science, madness, and the moral collapse to reflect anxieties about modernity, reason, and identity. As the genre evolved, horror expanded beyond castles and ghosts into psychological terror, cosmic dread, and social horror. Some works emphasize atmosphere and suggestion, others graphic violence and bodily violation. Some present evil as an external force, others as something generated by human institutions, ideology, or the mind itself. Horror is proven uniquely flexible, absorbing influence from realism, science fiction, fantasy, crime, and literary fiction. So here I go. Here are my 20 essential horror books. I will be presenting them roughly in publication order, and each author only gets one book on the list. Number 1, Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, published in 1818. A foundational work of modern horror and science fiction, Frankenstein explores creation, responsibility, and alienation through the tragic bond between Victor Frankenstein and his nameless creature. This book is incredible in many different ways. When Mary Shelley wrote this, she was either 18 or 19 years old. It does not feel like a book written by a young lady, maybe even a girl. It feels very profound, intelligent, and adult. It is also the foundation of the horror genre in the modern age, or maybe even the science fiction genre in the modern age. It is just a magnificent novel all the way around. As I said, it was originally published in 1818. Mary Shelley did revise it in 1836. There is some disagreement on which is the best edition to read. I tend to prefer the 1818 edition because that was when Mary Shelley was young. She was exploring her creativity as an author, and she was much more willing to take risks. When she got older, she sort of backed off on some of the risque thoughts and ideas that are in this novel. But either way, Frankenstein is an essential novel. Number 2, the 18 best stories of Edgar Allan Poe. These stories were published between the 1830s and the 1840s, a gathering of Poe's macabre tales, obsession, madness, premature burial, and unreliable narrators that defined psychological horror and detective fiction for generations. Right off the bat, you can ignore the edition that I'm recommending. You can pick up the complete tales, the complete poems, or any other anthology of Poe's stories and poems. Any one will do. I just picked this one as the best 18 because you don't have to read every single story that Poe wrote, although you may want to. He is such a fascinating author. And number 3, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson, published in 1886. a sharp moral allegory about duality and repression. This novella turns Victorian respectability inside out through the terrifying split between Jekyll and Hyde. What really lurks within the minds of men and women? Do we repress certain urges and desires? What if there were a way to release those inner demons, those inner thoughts, into a completely different being, however temporary? According to legend, Stevenson showed the first draft of this novella to his wife, and she was so horrified that she said, "How could you write such a book?" So Stevenson allegedly burned the first draft of his novel. His wife later came to him and said, "No, I didn't want you to burn this novel. It's great. I just thought it was truly terrifying." Because it is terrifying. What if we, in ourselves, we have this other personality that could come out? Such a magnificent horror novella. Number 4, The Great God Pan by Arthur Machen, 1890. A key text of cosmic and occult horror, Machen's novella suggests that reality itself is fragile and that glimpsing what lies beyond invites madness. This little novella is told in really 5 short stories that are all interconnected. In the first story, I'll give you the essence of the plot. There is a doctor who believes he can perform an operation on the brain, and afterwards that person can see into alternate realities, what exists in our world that we cannot see. And he takes a young girl and performs this operation. The operation does not have the results that the doctor expected. And from there, you get other stories connecting piece by piece until you get an ultimate horror at the end. Number 5, Dracula by Bram Stoker, 1897. Through letters, journals, and reports, Dracula transforms folklore into a modern nightmare, blending sexuality, disease, and imperial anxiety into endearing Gothic horror. Now, Dracula may be one of the most famous characters ever created, and it really stoked the vampire myth. This is why vampires are so popular in modern literature, because of Dracula. And it is a great novel. The first part with Jonathan Harker in Transylvania is one of the creepiest things ever written. And then you move to London in later parts of the novel, and you get this story laid out piece by piece through letters, through journals of what's going on. You can see the characters knowing that something is there, but not understanding it. And what is truly amazing about this is that many people have said this before, that when this novel was originally published in 1897, the Victorian readers may not have known what Dracula was. They might have heard of vampires, but it was the introduction of the vampire into modern literature. Dracula is indeed an essential novel. Number 6, At the Mountains of Badness by H.P. Lovecraft, 1936. An Antarctic expedition uncovers ruins older than humanity, revealing Lovecraft's bleak vision of a universe utterly indifferent to human meaning. What if there were creatures that existed outside of Earth? There were ancient and maybe nearly immortal. What happens when humans encounter these creatures, long thought dead, or maybe not dead, frozen under the Antarctic ice? This is one of Lovecraft's best stories. It is really his only true novel, and I think this is an essential book to cosmic horror. Number 7, I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, 1954. A lonely survivor in a world overrun by vampiric creatures confronts the terrifying idea that he may be the monster. A landmark novel that reshaped vampire lore through science, psychology, and existential dread. Matheson took the vampire lore from Dracula and he turned it on its head. He recreated it, saying, what if these are not supernatural creatures? What if they are a different form of humanity? And I initially was not going to include I Am Legend. I was going to include Richard Matheson's other famous horror novel, Hell House. But upon rereading I Am Legend last month, I decided I'm going to go with I Am Legend over Hell House, although arguably I could have easily gone the other way. Number 8, The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, 1959. A masterclass in psychological horror. Jackson's novel blurs the line between haunted houses and haunted minds, leaving readers unsure where the terror truly lives. And truly, that is the essence of this novel. After reading it, a good reader is going to question what actually happened in Hell House. Did ghosts overrun a mind, or is a mind overrun by itself? That's a question you'll have to answer for yourself after reading this book, but it is a fabulous and essential horror novel. Number 9, Psycho by Robert Bloch, 1959. A shocking descent into fractured identity and murder. Psycho strips away Gothic trappings to reveal horror rooted in the ordinary, the domestic, and the human mind. Unfortunately, I think this novel gets undercut by the film version by Alfred Hitchcock. But don't let that dissuade you. The novel itself is absolutely fantastic. And the Norman Bates of the novel is not quite the same as the Norman Bates of the movie. I kind of prefer the book version of Norman Bates, but you'll have to read this book yourself to make that own decision. Number 10, Rosemary's Baby by Ira Levin, 1967. A young woman's pregnancy becomes a slow, claustrophobic nightmare of paranoia and betrayal, as evil hides behind politeness, neighbors, and the promise of domestic bliss. This novel is truly creepy. You are introduced to a young couple in New York City who get invited to live at a prestigious apartment building full of historic meaning and value. And the neighbors are oh so nice to them. Unless they're not being really nice. What are these neighbors truly up to? And what should a mother love? Can a mother love any child that she bears? Well, this novel will bring that all into question. Number 11, The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, 1971. A confrontation between modern skepticism and ancient evil. The Exorcist grounds demonic possession in medical realism and spiritual dread. This is another case of a great novel being overshadowed by a movie version. The novel is absolutely fantastic, and everyone who thinks they're a horror reader needs to read The Exorcist. Put the movie version on the shelf for now and just read this fantastic novel because it explores what could be demonic possession, or is it just psychological trauma? And after reading this book, ask yourself that question again. If you have doubts, that means the novel is truly fantastic. Number 12, The Rats by James Herbert, 1971. Savage, fast-paced horror in which mutated rats overrun London, ushering in the era of brutal, working-class British horror fiction. Sometimes a horror novel does not need to be profound. You do not have to have any thoughts about the horror. You just want to experience an exciting story, something unusual and terrifying. I have often thought that this type of horror, the Killer Animals Attacks book, was based in the nuclear nightmare that people were living through in Britain and the United States, feared that the world would be destroyed by nuclear war. And that was truly terrifying. And you wanted something that was terrifying, but not realistic at all. So hence you have Killer Animals Attack. And The Rats was maybe the first and perhaps the best of the killer animal books ever written. A really essential horror novel. Number 13, Burnt Offerings by Robert Marasco, 1973. A slow burn haunted house novel where a summer rental feeds on its occupants, influencing later classics like The Shining. And this, again, as I said, a slow burn. You are slowly introduced to a horror that may or may not exist in this house somewhere in upstate New York, outside of New York City. There is a young family, the father, the mother, and the child, who are going to this summer rental. And things at this rental house just aren't normal. Or maybe they are normal until you reach the end. Number 14, Gwen in Green by Hugh, Zachary, 1974. A surreal, hallucinatory fantasy horror novel that blends environmental collapse, mythic imagery, and dreamlike menace. This novel is unusual in many different ways. You have a young couple, the husband and the wife, who get a fantastic deal on a house out in the sticks. The only problem is that their next door neighbor is going to be a nuclear power plant. And many people do not want to live next to a nuclear power plant. But this couple says, yeah, we'll buy this house until strange things start occurring. And a reader is going, oh no, you should not have moved to that nuclear power plant coming in. But the author is just leading you along. There is something else in this area, in these sticks, maybe even more terrifying than nuclear power. This is also a novel that presents feminism in a unique way from the 1970s. I like it a lot. I think this novel should get much more attention than it gets nowadays. Number 15, Salem's Lot by Stephen King, 1975. King reimagines the vampire myth as a communal infection, chronicling the quiet collapse of a small town under supernatural corruption. Of course, Stephen King is going to be on a list of the 20 essential horror novels. But which Stephen King novel should I pick? There are other novels that I kind of like a little bit more. Maybe The Shining, maybe Pet Sematary. But Salem's Lot was the most recent book that I reread, so I went with it. You could substitute other Stephen King novels. But what's curious about this novel on this list is, first, you have Dracula, the traditional vampire. Then there was I Am Legend, that reinvented the vampire. And then you have Stephen King, kind of going back to Bram Stoker's Dracula vision. Still a great novel. Number 16, The Manitou by Graham Masterton, 1977. Body horror and Native American mythology collide in a lurid high-concept novel that became a cult staple of the 1970s horror excess. Again, this is a horror novel that is not profound, that is not really deep, but it is truly entertaining, and it has one of the most humorous and unforgettable main characters ever written into a horror novel, a charlatan who's out to just bilk old ladies for their money until he encounters real evil. A lot of fun, and I think an essential horror novel. 17, Off Season by Jack Ketchum, 1981. A ferocious survival horror novel inspired by Shawnee Bean, stripping civilization away to reveal humanity at its most brutal. If you do not know, Shawnee Bean is a figure from Scottish folklore, not a reliably documented historical person. According to legend, he lived in Scotland in the late 16th century and led a clan of cannibals that terrorized travelers for decades. In this novel, Off Season, Jack Ketchum takes that legend and places it off the coast of Maine. When Ketchum sent this to a publisher, they did accept it, but they said it was too gory and too brutal to be published, and they asked for some revisions. Jack Ketchum did revise the book, and for some stupid reason, threw out his original manuscript. The second revision was still too gory for the publishers, so they asked for some more revisions, which Jack Ketchum did. And that was originally published in this version. This is a very collectible version of Off-Season, but it was still edited down. Later publishers released Ketchum's second draft of the book, and that is the edition that you will probably want to read and discover just how brutal, just how gory this early splatterpunk novel was. 18. Relic by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, 1995. A techno-thriller horror hybrid where a museum becomes a killing ground, launching the long-running Pendergast series. Make no mistake, Relic was a horror novel, and a fantastic horror novel at that. The essence of the plot is there is a monster running around the Museum of Natural History and New York people, killing people and eating parts of their brain. There was a later sequel, Reliquary, which also continued with this monster theme. After the second book in the Pendergast series, it became more of a techno-thriller kind of series, leaving behind its horror origins. But don't let that dissuade you. Relic is one fantastic horror novel. 19. The Terror by Dan Simmons, 2007. A fictionalized account of the doomed Franklin expedition, combining historical detail with supernatural dread and extreme environmental terror. If you are not familiar with the historical details of the Franklin expedition, Franklin was on a ship called the Terror, and he was trying to find the passage across the North Pole. The ship gets stuck in ice. They cannot get out of the ice. They're going to be there for a long time, stuck on this ship called the Terror. But there is something else out on the ice, something else which is a terror. And does the terror of the title refer to the ship or what's out on the ice? Such a fascinating work of historical fiction and horror. 20. The Fisherman by John Langan, 2016. A modern cosmic horror novel about grief and obsession, echoing Lovecraft while grinding the terror in emotional loss and storytelling itself. This is one of my favorite horror novels from the past 10 years. It truly explores horror in a different way. And the essence of the story is, if you have a loved one who dies, and then you hear rumors, legends about how you can bring back your loved one from the dead, don't do it. Okay, those are my 20 essential horror books that I think everyone should read. Please feel free to disagree with me in the comments of this video. I do have a number of runners-up, which would have been included on this list if I had made this list longer than 20 titles. Some of these runners-up are Hell House by Richard Matheson, 1971. Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice, 1976. Ghost Story by Peter Straub, 1979. The Cellar by Richard Lehman, 1980. The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker, 1986. Swan Song by Robert R. McKeown, 1987. Creakers by Edward Lee, 1994. The Ritual by Adam Neville, 2011. And I'm sure there are lots of other great essential horror books that did not make it onto my top 20 or my runners-up. Again, please feel free to leave those titles in the description of this video. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.